That's right, Kate. And as you mentioned, that scrub would be 24 hours. So we'll get to do this all over again. You mentioned the dry dress rehearsal. With a nominal offload of the fuel for this particular scrub, this is almost like a wet dress rehearsal, just taking it one step further. As you mentioned, for the dry dress, they did everything that we saw today, driving out to the pad, going up the elevators, and making their way into the vehicle, buckling up. The seats rotated, and they made their way far into the countdown, but before they started fueling the vehicle. Now they fueled the vehicle prior to launch, and again, we're following a scrub that occurred at about 2 minutes and 30 seconds prior to the T0 time. Due to tracking a ground issue with the T-TEB ignition fluid that's used on the engines to ignite them and fire the crew into orbit and eventually catching up with the International Space Station. But as they were continuing to look at this issue, decided to declare a scrub for today. That scrub is again a nominal scrub, so we'll be going through the scrub procedures, which include the detanking. They seem to be going a little faster than originally predicted. They called out to the crew about 50 minutes. Now we're inside 30 minutes from detanking the Falcon 9. That means the RP-1 refined kerosene and the liquid oxygen, that's the densified liquid oxygen that's on board, is being brought back into the lines that fuel them. So we'll be emptying those tanks. You can still see some of the oxygen, some of the gaseous oxygen billowing off the Falcon 9 rocket itself. So there is a little bit of fueling just to keep the crew safe. But you see, for the crew themselves, it's a very passive experience to launch scrub. All of these commands being issued by the teams on the ground. They'll continue to wait until and get status updates from the ground teams. Right now, they are connected by umbilical. We did hear that as part of the normal countdown, the Falcon 9 transferred to internal power, but they re-enabled auxiliary power back into the vehicle. So through the detanking process, we're getting power from the ground and not relying on the batteries inside the vehicles, so we can continue to work through this process. Again, Steve Bowen, Woody Hoberg, Sultan Al-Niyati, and Andrei Fedyaev on board. Crew Dragon Endeavour now passively waiting for the scrub process, detaking fuel first. This is going to be one of the lengthier processes before the crew access arm swings back and allows the crew to egress or exit the Dragon vehicle and get back on the ground. We'll do the same thing again in about 24 hours, witnessing the same series of events, suiting up in the suit room before going down and making their way over to the pad via Tesla until they make their way up the launch tower, the elevators over there, and make their way back into the same vehicle. We'll continue to follow along and give you updates as we hear them. Right now, really, it's just the detanking process, which is quite a lengthy process, so we'll continue to keep you updated there. That is still underway. That's one of the longer events that occur as part of a normal scrub. From left to right, Andrei Fedyaev, Woody Hoberg, Steve Bowen, Sultan Al-Niyati on board Crew Dragon Endeavour now. Now we'll continue to follow along through this process, but from here over in Hawthorne, we're now going to toss it back over to the Kennedy Space Center, where again we scrubbed at about 2 minutes 30 seconds to take us through and continue to give us updates along the scrub process. Daryl.
All right, thanks so much, Gary. Back here at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, I'm Daryl Nail, and I'm with Crew 3 Commander, NASA astronaut Raj Achari. And it goes without saying, Raja, looks like you're going to have to wait on
Exactly.
seeing your first launch. As Gary mentioned, we had a scrub at right around 1:43 a.m. Eastern Time. Got down inside T-minus 10 minutes, and they started to notice an issue with what's called TTAB, and these are the chemicals that help ignite the Falcon 9 engines, all 9 of them. And as it turned out, it looks like there wasn't enough confidence in moving forward with the amount of TTAB that was there to light those engines, and so we had a scrub called. And so now, from the astronaut's perspective, Raja, you're sitting in there. First of all, tell me about what kind of reacts.
Yeah, so I think it's good and bad, right? The bad side is obviously, you're ready to go, been waiting for it, but I think what's really encouraging and what, especially we're appreciative as the astronauts is knowing that everyone's got our back and that safety is the paramount thing. So as much as everyone wants to go, the right thing to do is obviously, in this case, to scrub. And so I think that's really easy to remember when you're in the seat and when you're dealing with, as you go through the process of de-arming the launch escape system, all those steps just remind you like, oh yeah, the safety's got to be first. I think it's also kind of a good deal because it gets a free run through of all the events in the timeline. So now they've seen it all once, they have the wet dress, but now you've taken it all the way down to near launch and you get another run of that, another run through the procedures. We talked earlier in the night about sleep shifting, so they're already sleep shifted. That's why we do it that way, so that they're, you can continue and no earlier than tomorrow another launch opportunity. So I think that's kind of what's going through the mind right now. You heard earlier the call up from the core to get into 5.100, so that's the procedure they're running now. Earlier in the night, they're using 4.100 is the procedure name, and that was the launch prep, and this is the scrub prep. And so as a rough rule of thumb, what they teach the crew is about as long as you were fueling, it'll take that long to defuel. So since we were pretty deep into the count, you would expect to take that amount of time to basically take all the fuel out of the rocket. So the big picture is the crew's going to stay there just like they were ready for launch with the visors down, completely restrained, because the rocket still has prop on board. And so the launch escape system is still armed. So it is still a volatile machine.
There's propellant on board.
Exactly. So they still, so we still have to treat it as if it's ready to go, as it is ready to go. Then once the prop is all off, then they can disarm the launch escape system, bring the crew access arm back out, and then egress the vehicle. So essentially what we saw earlier in the night, just run back in reverse. And then I think it's also a good example, you mentioned like inside T-minus 10 minutes is when we started to see some ground chatter and know there was an issue. You didn't hear that on the loops to the crew. And one of the reasons is, we work a lot in training to figure out like, what do you tell the crew? What don't you tell the crew? But generally speaking, if there's nothing the crew can do about something, or, in this case, there's an action being worked, then maybe it would maybe potentially only confuse the situation to give them extraneous information. In this case, once they had actionable info, like, hey, we're going to scrub, or we're looking at this, that's when they call it up, versus just peppering them with random pieces of information that may or may not be relevant. In today's case, it turned out to be relevant, but they let them know that once that was the case. But yeah, I think from the crew standpoint, this is something we, just about, honestly, our launch was the first time we ever had an event where nothing went wrong, because in all the sims you do, something generally goes wrong. That's the whole point. Right. So this is actually par for the course that you're like, oh yeah, of course, of course something happened, because that's what always happens in the sims.
That's how you sim.
Yeah, that's how you sim. So I think it's unexpected, and with, I think we relearn this every time we launch a vehicle, whether it's Artemis, SpaceX Dragon, a Starliner, we always learn things, and you can never assume everything's going to go perfectly. So I don't think it surprises anyone. Not to say that they're not disappointed. There's still that.
That's probably the first.
The first thing is like,
right?
Oh man, but then like, oh, that's good.
Right.
They made the safe decision. But yeah, absolutely a little disappointed. But you're still going to get to go to space. We'll just maybe do it a day or two later.
And currently, according to SpaceX, when they initially made the announcement, it takes about 50 minutes to detank the rocket. And currently, we're right around a half hour left in that process. So we've gone about 20 minutes in detanking. As you mentioned, astronauts have to stay strapped in exactly where they are to wait it out as that propellant is detanked. And I found that you can kind of get a visual marker by what you see right here, right? You can see
some venting
venting of the locks at the top, but then also just about as high as that condensation is coming off the
Dragon
rocket.
SpaceX with propellant offload update.
Now we get an update.
SpaceX Dragon, go ahead.
Our stage 2 LOX tank is offloaded. We're still tracking about another 25 to 30 minutes here. Last estimate may have been a little low.
SpaceX Dragon, copy, thanks.
So about halfway done.
About halfway, and you can see
Yeah,
it's
you're
almost about halfway
I
down.
actually never noticed that
Yeah.
before, but that's actually a really good insight.
And so now the astronauts are waiting in the capsule. SpaceX is looking at, and will look at after this procedure is complete, what's going on with the hardware. There is a launch opportunity tomorrow. And I want to emphasize this is an opportunity if the team decides that they can turn it around in 24 hours. And that would be with a T0 of 1:22 and 29 seconds a.m. Eastern Time. Again, tomorrow, well, this would be Tuesday, February 28th, with a T0 of 1:22 and 29 seconds a.m. There is a launch opportunity. If NASA and SpaceX decide to go forward with that, our coverage on NASA TV would start at 9:45 p.m., both on NASA TV and our streaming platforms. Also, from launch to dock, that transit would be about 33 and a half hours. So if they decide to launch on that day, docking would happen on March 1st at 10:04 Eastern Time. And there'd be a rendezvous, docking, and welcoming ceremony coverage on NASA TV that would start at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. And I say all that, again, with the asterisk that that is a decision that has yet to be made, whether or not
Absolutely.
they take that launch opportunity. There's
Yep.
going to be a time to look at this situation.
Right, and so like we heard that it was the situation with the T-tab, which is again sort of the, if you will, the igniter for the engines and making sure the fluid, there's enough fluid or sufficient fluid. So whatever the technical underlying of that problem that led to today, if that's something that can be resolved, and obviously that's something the teams will be diving into probably as soon as the prop is off the rocket. I'm sure they're going to be crawling all over it. That's one of the other logistical things that's happening here. So there's, once they start fueling the rocket as part of the countdown sequence and the crew armed the launch escape system, all the personnel around there also cleared out. And so right now there is no one really close to the rocket. So once the fuel is off the rocket and then the crew de-arms the LES, then people can approach again. So it does take some time for the vehicles and people and the closeout crew, just like it did to clear out the arm and prep it. They'll have to do the same thing to bring people back to the arm, re-prepare it to connect to the capsule. But again, it's actually in the long run kind of a good thing is when they do try this the second time, it means it'll go all the more smoother because they'll have got another rep of doing it. You mentioned the one thing having a longer time to rendezvous, the 33 hours. Actually, that's kind of another little maybe a positive silver lining out of this, because I know for us, for Crew 3, we really enjoyed our time in the capsule. You spend so much time training in Hawthorne, training in Houston, and there's something special, I think, about being in a small vehicle. Yes, it's cramped, so I wouldn't necessarily want to spend 2 weeks in there, but more than a few hours is just kind of fun because
Stop, catch your breath,
exactly,
relax.
yeah. Because once you hit the space station, you are on a tight timeline. Everything, every 5 minutes is accounted for, and it should be because it's expensive to get there, and we're doing a whole lot of science. The nice thing in the vehicle when you're just rendezvousing or waiting for those, we talked about phasing the orbits, you get time to just look out the window, hang out with your buds. It's kind of like a glamping trip. It's like, because you're sort of roughing it, but obviously it's some pretty nice digs.
But you can get out of your seat, right?
Exactly, and that's so it's a great time. So once they get in orbit and everything's checked out, they do get out of their seats. They can change out of their suits, and I thought that was some of the best time, both on the way up and the way down. Just spending time in the Dragon and in the thing that you've trained in so long. And you can really hear it. It talks to you. You can hear when you do burns. You'll hear the prop flowing. You can see the thrusters out the window. So it's a nice time, and it gives you some time to adapt to space. So for especially our crew, just like their crew, having 3 rookies on board, getting some time to adapt to zero gravity, getting used to moving around, how you restrain yourself. The more time you can get in the Dragon, the quicker you can adapt and get to work on the space station. So I think it's all time well spent when you have a few extra hours in the Dragon.
Raj has talked a lot about the crew and what that means for them potentially going forward. Want to go back to the TTEB. We've mentioned this, heard it a couple of times. I think one of our commentators actually spelled it out. If you look at the picture on the left, the SpaceX rocket on the pad, for those who are familiar with watching launches at night, that TTEB, it's the ignition fluid. You can actually see it light because it flashes green all around the bottom of the rocket. You can see a green flash, and that's what it does. It lights those 9 Merlin engines, and then you have a liftoff. And they call it TTEB because that's the acronym for triethyl aluminum, triethyl boron. And when they come together, they create that ignition that's necessary to light the rocket. And so that's something that SpaceX is going to look at. We also heard an update from SpaceX on the loops about the timing of the D-tank, which we are currently just about 27 minutes into that process. As astronaut Raja Chari was saying, this is a period of time where the astronauts just have to hold still while the propellant is taken out of the rocket.
Yep, and they're probably also going through. So we're always trying to think what if. That's always what's going through our mind. So right now they're probably thinking through. The LES is still hot, so that was, but we're not planning on going. So if there was a problem, we'd probably hit the emergency ground egress button, wait for the crew arm to swing out at that faster rate.
Well, crew arm, sorry. Attached,
yep,
right?
So but you would still want to, if you had to get out quickly, do the emergency ground egress. Make sure the LES is disarmed before you get out of your seats. And then egress if you had to, and so there's a few different ways, a few different types of egress if something else went wrong, and so whenever prop is moving, whether it's getting onloaded or offloaded, you're always ready for that.
So that LES stays armed through this process?
It actually stays armed as long as there's propellant on the rocket. It stays armed because if there is any kind of contingency, you'd want to use that to get off quickly. The other thing that will have to happen eventually is they'll have to rotate the seats back. So just like we saw the seats rotate to the launch position, once the LES is disarmed, then they'll rotate back to the loading and unloading configuration. There's also, we didn't talk about it too much, but it's not just people that the Dragon takes up there, it's cargo. And so you can't really see in this view. We saw earlier in the night when they were first loading up, you got a shot underneath their legs. Yeah, exactly. And so you can see the cargo that's under there, and that the stuff on the left under Andre's seat is mostly crew related in terms of like survival equipment. You see that red, you can kind of just see the red bag. That's the life raft. And so you saw that video earlier tonight. We talked about the Orion, the porch, and the Orion water training. So a lot of the water recovery equipment is in those pallets underneath Andre's seat if the crew had to do something on their own for some kind of landing in an unplanned area. And then this stuff that's kind of under Woody and Steve's seats, you can see they look more like metal lockers. And so those positions actually have power. So under Andre and Sultan's seats, there's no power to those locations, those cargo locations, but the ones under Woody and Steve, they actually have power, which means you can cool or heat things. But generally, when you're talking about science, going up and back from the station, oftentimes you need to keep stuff frozen or temperature controlled. And so those, usually probably the more valuable, I shouldn't valuable, but like the more time critical stuff is in those. And so more than likely when they offload the crew, probably won't be on camera anymore, but they'll probably also go in and either take some of that stuff out if there's anything that has to be chilled or temperature controlled to make sure it's still in a good state. And then when you dock with the station, those are some of the first things that come off to make sure that they get into the right.
SpaceX with propellant offload update.
SpaceX Dragon, go ahead.
Offloads are proceeding nominally, expecting another 15-20 minutes here.
SpaceX Dragon, copy, thank you.
Okay, so
That's
no-
Captain Stephen Boeing communicating with the launch team.
Exactly. Yep. In about another 15 to 20 minutes, and sounds like things are going nominally. But yeah, so the those pallets underneath there, like I said, they may. I'm not exactly sure what's in those particular ones, but it would not be uncommon to pull some of that stuff. They call it like late load cargo that for is very sensitive to temperature or maybe some power considerations that you would pull off and store. And then, like I said, when you dock, those are the first things that come out. But again, the kind of takeaway is it's not just people, but a whole bunch of stuff that goes to the space station by way of the Dragon. And then you can also put things in the trunk as well. On like the cargo Dragons, we saw it earlier tonight, the solar panels, but you can load things into the trunk. Here's a great shot of it. So that bottom section that looks with the solar panels and the black and the white inside there, you can actually put things inside there as well. That obviously doesn't have to be in a nice atmosphere, or so it's things that can be exposed to vacuum.
All right, good stuff. NASA astronaut Ranja Chari keeping us informed and updated on what the astronauts are going through and what it means for the cargo on board. I want to now take a moment to go back to SpaceX in Hawthorne, California, and get caught up with our NASA commentator, Gary Jordan. Gary?
Hey, thank you, Daryl. Yeah, we're following along here in Mission Control Hawthorne. As you mentioned, that status update on the fuel offloading, we're looking at about 15-20 minutes until that is completed. In the meantime, a series of more steps once these and get them out and go back to crew. But right now, if you're just tuning in, Dragon to the International Space Station. The ground teams declared on the first and second stage. To ignite, and if you follow our coverage, the flight of the Falcon 9.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. We are continuing through this nominal 20-minute left of the offload 30 a.m. Eastern time, expecting a call out liquid oxygen indicating that RP1, 5% remaining locks there on the first stage. So we're nearly there, but we will hear those progress callouts on the loops informing the crew, as you can see there on the launch escape kind of look like the crew access in this nominal day night, meaning no propellant involved. Similar procedure in terms of the crew get out of the capsule, including rest, just in reverse. So pretty simple from that standpoint, but there are also other things that we'll have to do. To breathe prior to allowing the closeout team prepared and ready to. Earlier today, that sea and airspace that we had closed off in preparation for launch. After that launch escape system is disabled, we'll be able to down just in case a launch abort. A Dragon abort, a pad abort in this case would be triggered, but as we mentioned,
one in locks off of stage 2. Expecting just another 5 minutes or so here until we are fully offloaded.
Ready for starting conference, thank you.
so that was SpaceX core Arthur Burialt, just informing the crew that there's about 5 minutes remaining, as I mentioned before, at this propellants. The locks remaining to Commander Steve Bowen. As I mentioned earlier, he sounds pretty relaxed and cool as ice cube here, and for good reason. The times before we have procedure can continue. Didn't want to than to be flying exactly what it was at about 2 minutes and 30 seconds prior to liftoff. And that was an issue that the crew had, and the problem, and ultimately called that scrub. Chairs, unfortunately, the progress of the propellant offloading and the overall vehicle health. But as I mentioned before, the commanders are not worried about just to disarm the launches stowed away. Team will go back up to.
It's the ground team's monitor escape system armed. Just to make sure the launch escape system, when the Falcon 9 is not fueled, it's in a safe configuration to go ahead and disarm that and go through. Then we'll have another opportunity to launch right now. The teams on the ground, and again, engines to ignite and propel the Falcon 9 and the Dragon into orbit. So look. Continue to talk and discuss about the issues before going ahead and proceeding with that attempt. We were counting. So we'd be looking at about 1:22 a.m. Eastern Time tomorrow. For our next attempt. In the meantime, we're continuing. So we're disarming the launch escape system. Really just sit.
This, of course, is, as you just mentioned, the launch escape system is still armed. So while it is armed, the crew will stay exactly as you see them. Dragon pad abort, of course, crew safety is the top priority at all times, even as we work through this nominal script. procedure. Status here as a LOX tank also basically still coming off of the first day of its propellant. The AM and 240 and should be hearing Hawthorne Mission Control, and offloading is complete, and that we will then prepare to disarm the launch escape system. So for those that have recently issue with the T-tech, the spark plug, to your car. If you drop it to fly, it's 1 minus 5 minutes, 2 minutes 30 seconds. There was prior to that
Offload update. This time, we have
Propellant load, or the propellant offload rather, being complete. So we'll be tracking to see when the as the ground train teams continue to track
decimal 100
2
and hold. Good read back, Dragon.
Okay, we are launch escape system staging. We are 2 Alpha 1.
So again, if you're just tuning in, the Dragon Endurance that issues to the Dragon system. So again, if you're just tuning in, like we got that armed. armed. Actually 2 minutes, 14 seconds. It was followed so we're continuing to follow a crew access arm. We did get kind of Crew Dragon, and so again the system has been disarmed. You heard the command for seat rotation, so we may be able to see that. And before launch, the seat rotates to about a 40-degree angle to allow so they were in the launch position. They've So they were in the launch position. They've just closing the fun. Head back over to Kennedy Space Center's Daryl for additional updates. I'm sure that they can see.
And as you see on the screen there, the white room connected back in.
To let the closeout crew come and make sure they help them out and make sure nothing is,
faster because everyone's done it once. There's a few seconds here and there getting it to go, but it's really fast. So the more time displays up here, perceptive if things and
Unzip.
Yep, getting their hands through to come get them.
So crew 6 to get the best 2 minutes and 14. A.m. Eastern Time. The SpaceX team will look for F9 of the Merlin going through their procedure. Coming up for Crusade, there's also another one. .30 p.m. I want to make a note that there have been
recovery crew is going to be approaching because if they do hear bumpsy
for our coverage for the SpaceX Falcon.
yeah.
But good.
Mentioned those follow-on launch opportunities if they
We're ready. And so that's a nail for us. A chart